James McLamb is the founder and CEO of Generation Youth and one of America's leading voices in youth development and life coaching. A former high school agriculture teacher turned author, speaker, and coach, James has dedicated his career to helping young people and those who guide them live with purpose, confidence, and character. Through his best-selling book, Tomorrow's Youth, the Generation Youth Journal, the Generation Youth Podcast, and national coaching programs, James continues his mission to equip parents, teachers, and mentors to ignite the potential of the next generation. James, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for your time today.
I'm excited to be here. As I told you before our call started, I have been following you for quite some time, so I was very excited to make this connection.
I love it. Thank you so much. So let's just start with, you have been working with young people for a really long time, for over 25 years. So I would love your insights on what differences you've noticed between, let's say, millennials and Gen Z, and how do you think tech plays a role in those differences?
Well, if we focus on the tech aspect, one of the biggest differences that I've noticed is millennials grew up with technology while Generation Z really grew up inside of technology. And what I mean by that is millennials can remember a time before smartphones. They can remember a time that they played outside until dark. They called friends, maybe even on landlines, and experienced social media as something that arrived during their teen years, maybe some of them in their college years.
Yeah.
Gen Z never had that transition.
Mm-hmm.
They were handed a digital world almost at birth. We created this world for them that we didn't, as adults, didn't even know how to live in. And they were born into it. And as a result, Gen Z, they're incredibly connected. They're informed. They can learn almost anything in seconds. They're entrepreneurial. There's so many great things about them. They're socially aware. They're globally connected. But at the same time, they've struggled with anxiety, loneliness, and confidence in ways that we haven't seen before. They struggle with the same issues that every generation does, but it is different because every moment of their lives can be photographed, posted, judged, and compared, and it's hard for them to develop a strong sense of self on that. I really often tell parents that previous generations were worried about fitting in with kids at their school. How do I, find my tribe here? How am I comparing myself to those around me? Today's teens, they're comparing themselves with millions of people online.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different kind of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things that came to mind as you were talking. I cite Jonathan Haidt a lot, but he talks about millennials and how they have better mental health outcomes than even my generation. I'm Gen X, so I'm like, right,
Me too.
You too. Okay, so we're young enough to have grown up with, old enough to have grown up with nothing, but young enough to have adapted very quickly. And yes, millennials were sort of right at the beginning of what we know today as our modern media and technology role. But he talks about so millennials mostly had flip phones, right? And he talks about this idea that brought them together, right? Versus Gen Z's technologies of smartphones and social media actually keep them apart. Like it's, the concept of connection is not physical connection, right? And it's sort of a very shallow form of connection, right? So to your point, that is one of the reasons why, and I never blame tech fully. There's a lot of dots being connected to that specific technology, right? It's not technology in general of their time. And then one more thing that came to mind, because I interview a lot of Gen Z activists in the space, and they're my favorite ones to talk to because they have, to your point, like they have amazing information and they're so smart and self-aware. And I asked them all, what do you think it would have been like had you not grown up with it? And there's like a major imagination gap, right? Like they can't even envision what it would be like to be without these technologies. So I think that's really hard for us as like adults and maybe millennials, Gen Z and above to really understand. But I really try to put myself in that mindset sometimes when I think about Gen Z, because like how could you imagine like this is all you knew growing up? So those were the things I wanted to add. I don't know if you had anything else to add to that sentiment.
Yeah, we created this world for younger generations, for the youngest of millennials and Gen Z. We thought we were doing such a great thing. We were providing them with opportunities that we never had, access to information quicker than anyone ever had. connecting to everything, and we were so excited. And yet we did not know how to handle this. We did not know how to live in this new space. And we expected a generation whose cognitive ability was still developing to go into this without any instructions, guidelines, or anything. And now we are just seeing what many people have been saying for probably a decade or more. Where now it's being confirmed. This is not, there's some problems here. This is not as good as what we thought it was going to be. We need to back up. It'd be like if we dropped in, if they dropped in the 1910s or 1920s, ultra fast, super high performance cars and gave them to people. And we did not have decades of gradually building our ability to handle those machines before they got to the ability that they are now of going 200 miles an hour plus.
Yeah, that's such a good metaphor. And I think what you said too about as parents, right? We just didn't know is so true.
Yeah.
I'm in the tech industry. I'm very tech savvy, and it's even hard for me. But I think it's absolutely true that, as Gen X and millennial parents, right? It's mostly Gen X and above for Gen Z, but
yeah,
that we just, as digital immigrants, we just didn't know how to handle it, right? We didn't know how to rein them in. We didn't really fully understand it, right? Where our kids really, really do. So I think there's a big gap there too. So that's really interesting.
And there's also the deal too that there's not that learning time. There's not that time for us to learn how to use it. Because everything happens so fast now. Everything is developed so quickly. We don't even have time to learn how to use these programs when new programs come in. I mean,
yeah, for sure. So true.
I mean, you remember Alta Vista was a big deal. You remember that? When the first search engine, one of the first search engines is Alta Vista, and we were all excited about that. And now, things happen so quickly. And
yeah. No, it's really, really, really true. I loved your metaphor too about the cars. That's really true. Okay. Can we stay on Gen Z for 1 second and Gen Z sentiment? So 47% of Gen Z says they wish TikTok was never invented. 45% say they won't allow their own kids to have smartphones until high school. So why do you think young people feel this way?
Well, they lived through the experiment. They were the guinea pigs of the experiment. For years, we've argued whether social media is harmful. Gen Z doesn't have to guess that. They've experienced it firsthand.
Yeah.
They've watched friendships damaged by social media. They felt the pressure of constant comparison. They watched their attention spans shrink, and they've watched anxiety increase. So what's fascinating to me is some of the strongest critics of excess technology are the young people themselves. It's not sometimes older millennials or our generation. And when I speak to a lot of young people, high schoolers and college students, I'll hear comments like, I waste too much time on my phone. I wish I could focus better. I miss hanging out with people. So they have lived it. This is why they're being able to say, hey, I wish it didn't exist.
Yeah, I'd actually love to push on that a little bit more, what you just brought up, because even more than that, Gen Z, they're founding organizations, they're building advocacy groups, they're pushing for sensible tech legislation. So to your point, they're incredibly self-aware, right? So, and I talk about this a lot because, again, you and I are the same generation and we grew up with TV mostly, right? We were not rising up to push back against TV and its effects, even though there was the argument at the time that maybe it's not so good for us, right? Which is so quaint compared to now. But I guess my question would be, we touched on this, but why do you think young people are actually like rising up against the technology of their time?
I think every generation eventually will push back on the excess of its culture at the time. But Gen Z, I don't think I'd say they're anti-technology as much as they're pro-human.
Yeah.
They understand the technology better than anyone. They've lived with it their entire lives.
Yeah.
And so they're asking these important questions like, why do I not feel more connected? Why am I so isolated? Why do I have unlimited entertainment and yet I have increasing levels of anxiety?
Yeah.
Why can we communicate with anybody in the world, but I struggle to have meaningful conversations with people in my classroom or teachers or adults? And these are smart questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're trying to create a healthier relationship with technology is really what they're shooting for.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I think, like you said, they're aware. I think many of them feel trapped for a couple of
Mm-hmm.
reasons. One, I mean, frankly, these technologies are addictive, right? And there's the collective action trap, right? Like they might want to get off, but all their friends are on, or all their
Exactly.
friends are using a certain thing. So I do think that they are. I know that they are looking for help, right? Whether it's from parents, right? Their own parents putting limits, their kid's not going to like it in the moment, but I've never heard of a kid that has not thanked their parents when they ultimately get to college or whatever, right? And their parents have helped set those boundaries, but they're also looking for society to help them set boundaries, right? And lawmakers to help with these boundaries, because I think they know that it's not a fair fight. I think they realize that even though they're so self-aware, they, like all of us,
Mm-hmm.
are frankly somewhat powerless, right? Some more than others against this really, really powerful technology. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that. And then also, this is just a little bit of a sidebar, but I don't know if you've heard this. I've read a couple of articles on this in different with different things, but Gen Z is actually also embracing analog technologies like record
Mm.
players, flip phones too. And they're really like you mentioned pro-human, which has made me want to think of it, especially with AI, which we're going to talk about. They have a very negative sentiment towards AI. I completely agree that they're longing for these more tactile
Yeah.
experiences, like more like the ones we grew up with. I think you were going to say something.
Well, I have my youngest is 16, my oldest is 26. And they're
Okay.
my girls, and there's a boy in the middle. And the difference between what we knew with the 26-year-old when she was coming out of middle school, you know, 14 years ago versus what we knew with the youngest one shows that my youngest wanted a record player. She wanted to have vinyl in the house. She wanted to hear that crackle, that popping, the sound of it. It made her feel more alive on this. Where my older, she wanted to have the iPods were real popular then, the nanos, and she was really wanting to get those things. And if we had known then what we know now about tech, we would have held her off a lot longer than we did. And I'll be honest, we held her out, I think, longer than most of her friends, more because we were like, we don't really need you to have all this smartphone technology. Matter of fact, she had a phone, and going into high school, and then we took it away because we figured, okay, you're not handling it very well. It's affecting your attention and stuff, and so we even held it out even longer for the
Mm-hmm.
youngest.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That's an interesting age span that you have because absolutely nobody knew. And I give
Mm-hmm.
parents so much grace, right? And honestly, I credit Anxious Generation with a very broad awareness, but also there's just been so many studies and just whistleblowers and all kinds of things. But this is all in the past like 3 years, I would say, right? So even for you and your 16-year-old, how could, I mean, maybe you know more than some other parents. I mean, I definitely knew more than some other parents just because I've
Yeah.
been a social media marketer and in the tech industry, right? But your average parent, I completely agree. Like there's no way that they could have known, right? So I don't know if you want to touch on that anymore, like the differences between even the 16 and 26, but
Well, I'll
that is
say
so
so. The
true.
difference between the way they were educated in school.
Okay.
My daughter was educated with technology, but it was school providing that technology. And what I mean by that is the teacher was
Yeah.
using smartboard, the teacher
Yeah.
was using this, the teacher was using that. Where when my daughter came along, and even my son, who is in his early 20s, they were handed Chromebooks really early. And my wife and I were
Yeah.
like, this is not a good. And we really had to stay on top of that. And we saw the negative effects of, unmonitored Chromebooks, in his class and what was going on. And so my youngest, their school was using, once they got into middle school, they were using iPads and continue to
Yeah.
do all their work on that. And I'm like, come on. And now I actually had a meeting with the principal at her school about 3 weeks ago, and they're like, we've got to figure out how to pull back on that without
Yeah.
angering parents, thinking, oh, you're not giving our kids the leg up they need on this technology world. They need to know all this stuff. And I think you
Yeah.
would agree. They'll figure it out pretty easily on their own. They don't need schools to do this. Have you
Yeah.
have you heard?
Yeah.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, have you heard that there's a charter school out in the Bay Area in California that is predominant by tech peoples, kids. It was started by them, and they would not even let technology in any way, computers or anything, until they get
Yeah.
into high school.
Yeah.
So
I
the
don't know
people
if
who
you're
are
talking
creating this are saying we don't want our kids to do it, and then the rest of
for,
us are like, yeah, we got to give it to them when they're 8. What's
for
up?
sure. I don't know if you're talking about Waldorf schools, but that is a well-known thing that people in Silicon Valley in particular, but people in the tech industry, yeah, they send their kids to tech-free schools. I mean, I'm one of them. My daughter is now in a Waldorf. She's incoming 5th grade. We started traditional, but we ended up there with her, buy-in, like complete buy-in. So I'm pretty familiar with that. But yes, it's absolutely true that not only do they limit for their own kids, smartphones, apps, things like that, but in schools as well. And I wasn't going to ask you about the ed tech debate and the Chromebook debate, but I will tell you, because one of my jobs is kind of being on the pulse of trends, that tide is turning. I don't know if you saw
Yes.
the testimony of Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath in January, where he talked about Gen Z being less cognitively capable. The IQ scores are down for the first time, generation after generation. And it's not that they're less capable. He's actually directly connecting the dots to the tech in schools. So that really kicked off the debate. If you ask me, I really see him as like the Jonathan Haidt of ed tech, because now he's going around, really spreading that message. And I will say, because I'm on the ground with schools, just with my work with Dopamine, and I don't know if you've heard LAUSD, which is we're LA based, is the second largest district in the country. And just a few weeks ago, just last month, they voted on a resolution to reverse screen forward practices.
Wow.
And that's huge. So they were one of the first to do this on phone free schools. So I really do think that it is going the other way. For sure, it's going to take time, like all these things do, just like phone free schools did. But to your point about parents, one of the things we really tried to do is make sure that they understand, and I say this all the time because this comes up in the parent eds, well, won't my kid be behind if they're not learning to use Chromebooks, if they're not learning to use smartphones? And I always tell them, this is technology that's so easy, a baby can operate it, right? They are going to figure it out very quickly. And the skills that they're not building are the skills that they can't, ever go back and develop. So it's a big topic.
It is a big topic. And the
yeah.
dangers that we're seeing, the things that it's causing, the smartphones that it's causing. I read this morning, I mean, this is not specifically on youth, but I did read this morning that a study came out about 3 weeks ago that identified that a part of the drop in birth rates is a causation. They were not a correlation. They were saying a causation with smartphones. You saw that about 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That kind of took me off. I've been reading that all morning, the actual study of it, and I'm like, this is amazing.
I mean, back to like that this technology keeps us apart, right? So, and I want to ask you about young men actually next, but I mean, if you think about it, if all your needs are met on the smartphone, right? And this is, mostly young men, but it's everybody. And I'm talking about porn. I'm talking about, dating apps. I mean, I suppose can be connective if you ultimately meet up, right? But sometimes that doesn't necessarily happen. But anyway, if everything's so easy and comes to you without any effort, like why would you go out in the real world and get rejected? Why would you go out and do the things you need to do to actually maintain a relationship? So yeah, there's a lot there. And like you said, that we're starting to get actual evidence and studies and things like that coming out. But I do actually, this would be a good time to ask you about failure to launch. So young men specifically are falling behind actually at every milestone. So women now make up nearly 60% of college undergraduates. Men account for nearly 80% of suicide deaths.
Yeah.
And NEET, which is the youth not in employment, education, or training rates for young men, are around 12%. So why do you think young men specifically are struggling? And again, how do you think tech plays a role? We just talked about that study about the birth rates, but what else would you say about this?
Well, I'd say historically young men develop confidence through real world challenges. They work jobs, they build things, they play sports, they solve problems, they have conflict relationships between each other, rough housing, all those types of things. They took risks. They learned resilience through experiences. But now, and I can say this because I have a 23-year-old son who has I've watched go through this. Young men are spending fewer hours in those types of environments and more hours in digital ones. And the problem is that achievement in that virtual world often feels like achievement to them, but with actually producing any kind of growth, with actually producing anything in them. They can level up in a game without developing any real world competence. They can connect followers online without really getting any kind of meaningful relationships. They can spend hours consuming content and they've never created anything. They've never expanded their mind. There's a difference between reading something and imagining what you're reading, visualizing it in your brain as you're reading it versus seeing something all the time. They need challenge. They need purpose. They need responsibility. And the young men that I see thriving are the ones doing hard things. They're working, they're serving, they're leading, they're building skills, they're pursuing some goals bigger than they are. They don't grow through comfort. They grow through challenge. And tech often provides endless comfort where the real world can provide growth. And they're just living in that tech world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I keep hearing the same thing, which is to struggle is where we grow, right? And you and I know this just based on how we grew up. It was just part of it. But yes, technology removes the friction out of everything you described. I'm going to quote Jonathan Haidt again, because this is so good. I repeat it so much. He says that video games satisfy men's primal instinct for war, where porn satisfies their primal instinct to procreate, right? So between those two things, like why that are both kind of like pretty effortless, right? Why would you go and deal with the struggle of the real world? So yeah, I do think there's sort of, and there's challenges for girls too. Obviously, we know that social media is much trickier for girls, right? My son is 13 now. And social media is not even a thing. Like it's not even something, we don't do it, obviously, in our family, but it's just not even something that he worries about or thinks about or anything, right? Video games have always been a challenge. So yeah, I think the key is struggle, right? A little bit of effort is good for all of us, right? And I mean, I'll just add one more thing because, we teach about the brain science of dopamine and how all that works. And dopamine is not a bad thing. And we get it from all kinds of real world things, right? But typically in the real world, it's more of like a slow dopamine, right? You have to put in a lot of effort to run across the soccer field and kick the goal to get the dopamine, right? Versus when you're playing maybe a soccer video game, those rewards are coming to you with much less effort, right? There's not a physical effort. In video games, the rules are made for you. Things are just fed to you more, right? Versus you actually seeking them out. So I guess I would just wrap that up with saying, like, it's not that I think either of us are saying you have to just go struggle and suffer, right? It's that when you put in the effort, when you struggle a little bit, you're still going to get a great reward, right? But it's just a different type, right? Where
and there's a subtle difference. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say
there's even a subtle
meaningful
difference. In the gaming now than it was for millennials or even the end of our generation as gaming first started. Back then, if you were doing a game and you had to stop, most of the time it started you back at the beginning. If you were playing Donkey Kong and you fell, you had to start back at the beginning. You didn't get to save your progress and pick it up. Now, the games are created in such a way that you don't lose anything if you fail. You can pick right back up where you're at. So folks might say, well, what does that mean? What does that do anything? Well, it just suddenly does not create that challenge in them. It doesn't create that effort. I mean, it used to take hours if you had a video game to get to a certain level. And now you could just, I'll stop here. I'll pick it up next week, or I pick it up after I eat lunch, or, and it keeps moving forward. It's just those little subtle things remove any kind of challenge that they have.
Yeah. And even I mean, I torture my kids in like the best way, but even like they can just Google how to do something. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
played video games growing up, but like we had to figure out how to get around this challenge or figure out, I don't know, how to shortcut something or whatever. And
Yes.
I will, my son plays video games. We limit time, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to Google that for you. Like you figure it out, right? So even those moments are moments of growth and they will feel great about themselves if they can figure it out on their own. But yeah, there's so many things that even it's not it's just apples and oranges. Like I tell parents like you cannot think of video games the way we grew up with video games. Like you've described some of the
Yeah.
differences, like the challenge, but then there's the aspect of most modern video games are actually social media. You know, your Robloxes and your Fortnites, like that is not a video game. That is a social media where you are playing a game, right? And it's just it's so night and day different than what we grew up with. And one of the things also that we tell parents is we really want everybody just thinking about the intent of the technology, right? So if a game is free to play, like what does this game want from me, right? Well, it wants to keep me on as long as it can, right? To either show me
Exactly.
ads or sell me in-app purchases. I mean, there's so many things I could say about gaming, but there's gambling, you know, built
Mm-hmm.
inside of games. So they're not what we grew up with. And if they were, I think we wouldn't be having a lot of these conversations, but they are designed to hold mostly young men, women too, to hold their attention as long as possible. And again, back to that, it's not a fair fight. It's just not, you know?
No.
So again, I have a lot to say about video games, but I wanted to just piggyback on what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree on video games, and I like to play as still at my age. There are certain times that I'll get engaged with it, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I can take a step back and go, okay, this is too deep. This is too much. This is too real
Yeah.
almost sometimes.
Yeah, but back to like you had that level of awareness where you could compare it to the Donkey Kong, right? Where
Yeah.
as a kid, if this is all you grew up with, if all the video games are like this, like, you know, and that's why we really try to educate young people to have that awareness because otherwise, how would you? How would you know that this is in some cases, frankly, predatory, right? What these
Mm.
games are doing. So yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, it's all about that level of awareness for sure. So we touched on this, but I kind of want to come back to this idea of what young people need for the future. We covered it just like a tiny bit, but I'm going to read you a few things that different CEOs have said. So, the CEO of Microsoft, he has said that empathy is perhaps the most critical leadership skill. CEO of Google urged students to gain real world experience and be well rounded. So, that's what we were just talking about. The CEO of LinkedIn predicted that the future belongs to people that are adaptable and can keep
Mm.
up new ways of working. So, what skills do you think young people need for the future in the age of AI?
Well, AI can process information faster than any of us, but what it can't do is replace the character, the empathy, the leadership, the wisdom, the integrity, the courage, the creativity, that genuine human connection. So, young people who are going to thrive are going to be the ones who not only have those tech skills, but have human skills. And I think you mentioned one that I would put up there, the adaptability. Change is going to be happening rapidly. They need to know how to pivot and be able to move on these things. The ability to have creative thinking so they can see, okay, there's something behind this. Why are they keeping me on this site for so long? Why is this doing this way? Why is it leading me this way? Why are these algorithms continually popping this up on my feed? Or communication skills, which are lacking so much. There's a lot of people that we certify to be youth life coaches, and they talk about that the biggest issue that they are dealing with is parents coming to them saying, my kid does not know how to communicate with me or with friends or with adults.
Yeah.
So having that ability to do that, the ability to understand themselves and others, kind of that emotional intelligence that they need. So these are things that these are skills I think they definitely need to have. They need to work through, helps them develop the resilience. I've told students for years that your degree may get you in the door, but your character will determine how far you go once you're inside.
Yeah.
And if we're always just concentrating on the tech aspect of it and not on these human skills, they're not going to get very far at all.
Yeah, it's so true. I think we keep coming back to those human skills. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really keeping a close eye on AI. We've built out AI literacy at Dopamine. And that is the most common theme with even the people that are running the AI companies. Yes, they talk about you will need literacy and capability to use them in the future, but the human skills are still EQ, emotional intelligence, and those soft skills are so important. And especially since most of the job displacement is happening in those entry level roles, this
Yeah.
is where everybody, all the thought leaders in the space are resonating around this idea that those human skills are what's going to give you that advantage as a young person. So I cannot stress it more to parents that that is absolutely where we need to be focused. And then number two, you mentioned this earlier, but the technology is so changing so quickly. It drives me crazy when schools are still teaching like technical skills that are not even going to be viable in
Yeah.
2, 3, 5 years, right? And we're spending time on this. And again, kids are super smart. They're going to be able to learn that technical skill really quickly. But when you talk to the people that are actually doing the hiring, that the trend is moving away from, even in the software space, it's moving away from like coding capabilities and things like that, because those things can be taught, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
other stuff that cannot be taught: having the conversation, being adaptable, being flexible, working on a team. And it's leadership skills. Like the entry level jobs are, I think, and everybody thinks are the ones that are affected the most. So young people are going to need to be able to learn to lead faster than before, is basically my thesis on this. And I didn't make that up. So yeah, lots to say about AI too, but I'm glad that you agree that those are, it's what you're seeing too on the ground. Because not only do you have kids that are that age, but you work with kids that age. So I think
And
if
years ago,
anybody can see it, you can. Yeah.
several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago, I was teaching a youth certification, youth life coaching certification class, and we were talking about Gen Alpha, this emerging generation that's
Yeah.
now early teens, depending on how you classify them. And they were saying, okay, what's going to be the big issues? And I told them at the time, I thought AI and VR, virtual reality, were going to be the two biggest issues. And this was before chat and all these programs exploded on the scene. So we've already seen AI take hold of this world, and they're just changing things so rapidly. VR is what really scares me, because
Mm-hmm.
if they can get in a virtual reality setting where it looks less like a Nintendo Wii, when you go in
Yeah.
there, it kind of looks, and more like Call of Duty, where it's so real you cannot tell the difference, that's
Yeah.
going to be a scary place for us to be, because now
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have people that will be retreating into those VR worlds and may not come out. And I'm
Yeah.
reminded of the Pixar movie WALL-E, where those
Yeah.
people were on their little headsets and sitting there. They live
Yeah.
their entire lives on that. That could happen. And
Yeah.
folks are saying, "Oh, you're overreacting. You're being an alarmist." Well, the other stuff has happened. Why can't
Yeah.
we see this being the same way?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that we're already halfway there, right? With
Mm-hmm.
smartphones. And we saw this during the pandemic, right? Where everything just shot up because we couldn't be together, right? Social media use, short form video, you name it. And it never went the other direction, right? So we are, I think, already primed for this. And yeah, it makes me incredibly worried for young people as well, for the reasons that we've talked about. So yeah, for sure. Can I ask you one more thing about, and
Sure.
I'd love to just like circle back to sentiment, because I think you're more tuned in with it because you work with young people all the time. So I don't know if you've seen sort of the polling on this, but according to a recent Gallup poll, 48% of Gen Z now feels that AI's risks outweigh its benefits in work
Mm.
settings specifically, and that's up from 37% just 1 year ago. So the sentiment is really, really declining here. Why do you think young people feel this way?
I think a lot of, at least the ones that I've encountered and worked with, they're experiencing a mixture of both excitement about what's happening and uncertainty.
Yeah.
They know that this is a very powerful thing, it can help them learn faster, it can create faster, it can solve problems, but they're asking a very reasonable question: what's going to happen to me as a result of this? They hear these conversations or see it online or on news sites about automation, about job displacement, rapidly changing industries, and it's natural for them to feel concerned about it. There's a little bit of scared. I think their concern is very healthy. Um, every major technology revolution produces opportunities and disruptions, and these students are really not going to succeed. Won't be the ones that compete against AI. Those are not going to be the ones who succeed, the ones that compete, but the ones who learn to work alongside it,
Yeah.
to integrate it in a healthy way. So maybe using AI as like a calculator for the mind. Calculators didn't eliminate the need for mathematics, but it allowed them to solve bigger problems. And maybe that's how we can use this. Hey, AI can help you do bigger things. It's not going to replace you. It won't eliminate the need for human beings, but it can increase their value. I don't think the future belongs to AI, but it
Mm-hmm.
belongs to people who know how to use AI
Mm-hmm.
without allowing artificial intelligence to replace the qualities that make us uniquely human.
Yeah.
So they are scared. They can see this, and they just need guidance, some coaching on how to integrate it healthy.
Yeah. And I'll just add one more thing to that because, again, we are teaching AI literacy now, including to high schoolers. And one of the things that we emphasize to everybody, including parents, is just how important it is to have a foundation of knowledge before you use AI. So I don't know if you resonate with this, but we're saying like not till like right before college, right? Because of all the things we've talked about some of that cognitive offloading, right? Like if you're not working, if you're not struggling, you're not learning, right? And then there's kind of more technical things like, how are you going to know if it's hallucinating or making things up, right? If you don't have like an in-depth knowledge of that subject. So all of these things point to what you were just talking about, where if you're using it if you're saying, hey, write me an essay, like that is not obviously the correct and appropriate use of AI. That is where AI is going to displace you versus I've written my essay. Now I'm going to have it help me fine tune it. It's just like a completely different story, right? So I think you're absolutely right about this concept of how do I work alongside it? Because if I was a young person, I would be worried about displacing me, but not if I can do things myself versus, and it happens really quickly. And I notice it in myself because I use AI every day that I get lazy, with certain things, right?
Yes.
And especially with writing, I write a lot. I really have to force myself to do the effort, write the draft, and get to a certain point, right? Before I engage AI. And I'll engage it to like help me, find sources or maybe fine tune an area or something like that. But I've done most of the work already, right? Number one. And number two, what I'm writing about, I'm already aware of. Because I will tell you, I don't know how many times a day, but it's a lot. I push back and I say, are you sure about this? And it will say, no, I'm actually not sure. Like either I made it up or, oh no, you're right. That source was wrong. So again, another really complex, deep topic, but it just goes back to, you've got to have that foundation of knowledge or yes, it will displace you. Right. So
it's funny you talk about pushing back on it. I'll use when I'm trying to write something and I want factual information. I'll use 3 different AI programs to search and see what shows up in both or on all 3 of them. Because then I figure if it's showing up on 3 competing platforms, probably has some validity to it. If it's just showing up in one, I'm going, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Where did chat find this, and why didn't Gronk or Claude not find it, or whoever I'm losing at the time.
Right. And I think, because of our age, like we just are naturally critical about technology. And I say this all the time. I grew up with technology not working. When I started working on the computer every day for work, and I've always worked on Macs because I'm in kind of more the creative industry, it like did not work. You had to figure out if something went down, how to fix it. There was no Apple Care, there was nothing, and it went down all the time. So I think when you come from and then, if you're younger, like I would say iOS X and above, and software started to automatically update and things like that. I think for the most part today, technology just kind of works. So I think, again, if you grew up with that, you're not going to grow up with those natural critical thinking skills like you're talking about. Like I never trust technology fully. And yeah, it does go down or it does mess up or whatever. It is fallible. So yeah, I think that's interesting that you were talking about your natural instinct to double check and cross check. But I don't think young people have that. And that's why it's so important to me that we help teach that, because they need to know, right? So that's really fun.
Now, I have to ask then, since you said you started using Macs, you're from the Apple world. What was the first Apple computer that you had? Do you remember?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to sound 900 years old, but I started working as a designer in 1996. And that year, I want to say it was like a Quadra. Like, does that sound right? And then
I'm a little older there because my first one was an LC2.
Okay. I mean,
I remember that.
We had the Apple IIc or Apple IIe, I can't remember, growing up. So this was like the 80s, but I'm talking about like professionally, because my background's in graphic design and advertising. I believe that was the first like power, computer. And that was even before the towers. So I can't remember what the first one of those was, like the G something. I can't even remember. It was so long ago when those came out with Mac, but this was just before that. So yeah, it's I don't know. And I feel like, again, I feel pretty good about our generation kind of being that bridge, right? Where, because also we adapted very quickly. Like Gen X is actually pretty tech savvy when you look at like the different generations. So, but yeah, I think it's goes back to that struggle, goes back to the problem solving and the creativity and all that. When everything just works and when everything's just fed to you, I think it's really hard to get that. So
when floppy disks were actually floppy, a big 5-inch, and you could bend them some before you got the 3.5-inch ones that were harder.
I know. Yeah. Well, James,
if we were speaking to younger generations, they would just be looking at us like, what are you people talking about? Floppy disk?
I know, but I actually think they love it. Like when I talk to even my kids, or when I talk to the young people that I work with dopamine, they love hearing about it. I think it fascinates them for the reasons that we talked about. So yeah, I think there's still some value there. James, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was great to meet you.
Thank you.
And if you have just a few more minutes, I'm doing something new where I want to ask you just like a few kind of fun personal questions. So it doesn't have to take long, but they're related to technology. So are you ready? Are you down?
Yes, I'm down.
So first question is, what was your first communication device as a teen?
Communication. Well, we had landlines, so that would be have the only way to do it. The long landlines. There was one phone in the house that was cordless, but everything else was had a cord on it. And it had those long cords on it that you could walk. Yep. You could take it off. It was on the wall, and you could take the receiver off the wall and go in a closet or go in the next room so nobody could hear you. And so it was a actual communication device, was a landline phone.
It's really funny. I'm sure you've heard this, but the landline's back, and there's companies. So I got my daughter. She's 10. I got her the Tin Can. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they're actually on purpose recreating the landline with the cord. And part of the philosophy, but you can also sync it to your phone. So I can control like who she talks to and downtime hours and all that. But they actually talk about how it's purposeful to where you can't walk all over with it, right? It makes it more intentional, safer for younger kids and all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, they're trying to literally recreate the experience that we grew up with. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's cool. So second, what were your parents' media or tech rules, or did they have any?
Well, gosh, there wasn't much there.
Yeah.
That we would do. I mean, the most media or tech that I wanted was, I wanted an Atari game system, as I was growing up. So that was an investment there. But after the initial games, I had to earn money to buy my own games. So we didn't have a great thing. You ended up trading with friends or something like that. So there wasn't rules on what I could have. It was more rules on what they were willing to spend money on.
Yeah.
So it was not, it was like, well, we're not buying that. That's too expensive. We're not going to get that. That's too expensive. More than you shouldn't have this, or you should be limited on that. Because, we had no idea these things might cause problems later. They just looked at it as, some
Yeah.
kind of entertainment value. So
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I almost think that because of the limits of the technology of that time, there didn't almost need to be rules, right? I talk about
right,
this all the time, especially when I talk to young people, like even TV, right? You had to catch the show at the right time, right? And when you got to a certain time of night, there'd be either very limited things or very boring things, right? So there's no way you could even stay up all night, even if you wanted to, right?
or
And
making a
if you,
mixtape,
right, well,
recording a
then there's that.
mixtape.
Yeah.
That the
Yeah.
first 10 seconds would be the DJ,
Yeah.
announcing over your favorite
Yeah.
song, or
Yeah. So like, so yeah, it's really just the wide open nature of everything now and the completely on demand nature of everything now that I think warrants the rules. But like we have, it's a reproduction Pac-Man like arcade game in our house.
Mhm.
There's no rules on that because my kids could take it or leave it. They'll go play it for 10 minutes and then they'll walk away, right? Like there
right,
actually is no reason to put rules around that versus the very persuasive, alluring technology. Yeah, we have to put rules on that. Otherwise, they'd be on it all day. So I think that's interesting what you said about like, yeah, there kind of didn't need to be rules because there wasn't that much, right?
right.
So I think that's interesting. Okay, last one. What is one memory you have about life before smartphones? So maybe it's like in your adult life.
Well, before smartphones, adult life. Oh gosh, that's a great question.
It's hard to remember.
It is. But I was teaching. It was my first decade of teaching before really smartphones, and I remember us getting the flip phone during that time process. But we had the way people could get in touch with me. Okay, this is the kind of a memory that sticks out, was through a pager. I
Yeah.
had a pager, so that some of the other businesses and stuff that I was associated with, if they needed to contact me, they would page me, and then during
Yeah.
breaks at school, I would go find a actual phone and call
Yeah.
them and say, "Hey, what's up? I saw that you did." So that
Yeah.
that's a memory of being able to do this, immediate notifications,
Yeah.
in a text. So much so that now, except for phone calls and a text, I cut off all notifications. I just cannot
Yeah.
stand it to pop up on my
Yeah.
phone. And I see my 23-year-old son, stuff's always popping up on his, and I'm like, how do you work, or how do you even operate with this thing going off all the time? I'm used to it. I'm like,
Yeah. No,
I
they can't. It's actually maddening, and it does show that it affects productivity and everything else.
mhm.
So yeah, that's funny. I had a pager in high school that was, and I try to remember. I mean, I do remember like getting a page and then having to find a phone, but the one thing I cannot remember is like, how did we make plans? Like we must have like called each other on the landline and figured out where to meet or whatever. But like, that part's really hard to remember for me. Before it, and this is like way before, because then I had the flip phone and then eventually the smartphone. Flip phone probably in my 20s, smartphone, not till like probably late 20s. But yeah, that was one of the things where I really try to struggle to even remember how we did that. But yeah, the pager. And to your point, back to like the not instant gratification, like you had to wait, but also it
Yeah,
wasn't as stressful because you didn't really know what they wanted or needed, right? So it's, to me, when I get a text and it's something maybe important or something where I have to action, like I start feeling stressed out about having to action that thing right away, even if I can't. And I think there's something there about, we were just used to having to wait and nothing was as much of an emergency. I feel like everything's an emergency now, which is not good for any of
I
us.
know.
So all right, well, thanks for playing along. Those were
Well, thank
my
you for those. That was
little
fun.
fun. Yeah, it is fun to try to remember. So thanks again. I really appreciate it. And keep doing what you're doing with the young people. I love the work you're doing. So thank you. Thank you.
I so appreciate what you're doing. As I said, I have been following, and I love your distinct marketing branding on your Instagram channel. I know when I see yours pop up because it has that distinct look to it as well. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it, James.